The Art of Being Ruled. Wyndham Lewis. Original publication 1926. 1989 edition. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. Part 11. Proudhon and Rousseau. Chapter 12. Fascism as an Alternative. I will now return to, and bring to a conclusion, the general question of the contrasting ideals of the federalist or syndicalist on the one hand, and the collectivist or Marxian socialist on the other. The objection to a centralized control is that you are being controlled by somebody you have never seen, with whom you are not in personal touch, and who does not therefore personally sympathize with your conditions. But the vanity of that si la roi savait, if the king only knew, has been exposed too often to require restating. The rich person intimately acquainted with the conditions of your misery is not usually more kind, that is the universal experience of the poor, than the stranger. Indeed, the reverse is the case. A stranger does not at least personally dislike you, and you benefit to that extent from being unacquainted with your tyrant. An officially appointed podesta is not likely to be a kindly old gentleman or Father Christmas. But at least, on the whole, he would be pleasanter to deal with than a successful and overweening member of your own parish and street. The abstractness that is so much chided is really in the position of the winter wind of Shakespeare's song, it is better than a person. However unkind it is, you can be philosophic about it, for it is only the wind. That is why Rousseau or Marx appear to me more humane, even, in the end, than is the pervasive, familiar, parish pump sociability of Proudhon, which is extremely human, but might not, for that reason, be very humane. Finally, I will take the other objection, namely, that of the genius of the people or the genius of a countryside, which is supposed to be outraged by the principle of centralization if carried as far as is proposed by the Italian fascist government. Renan, in discussing the characteristic beliefs of Israel, insists that you can only judge a people by its aristocracy. The rest of a people is a falling away from this intense, conscious, more highly evolved, and sharply defined center of life. Thus, in the case that he was considering, it was with great difficulty that the theocratic rulers of Israel succeeded in imposing on their subjects the monotheism that we associate with the Jewish race, and especially the northern tribes remained obstinately idolatrous. But supposing that view of the matter to be correct, what ensues? First, the ruling caste in a country has usually been of a different race from the subject population. Class starts by being merely race, as the result of some form of conquest. If, owing to the firmness and energy of this ruling caste, the nation so formed becomes a powerful one, what, applying Renan's rule, is the nation, with all its characteristic institutions? It is a system of foreign values imposed on an already mixed bed of earlier stocks. But the dominant ideology is that of the rulers, invariably. The ideas of a people are always the ideas of the class in power. On top of that you have to erect the equally important fact that the individual, more or less educated and informed, of whatever race, thinks and feels differently, desiderates a different set of things, from serf or subject. The ruling caste is less national, therefore, in one sense, although more so in another. An English, French, or Italian noble of the 17th century was evidently far more international than a small shopkeeper or farmer of the nation to which he belonged. Yet the governmental ideology, the governmental metaphysic, which is imposed on the people and the world without as the characteristic product of such and such a nation, is not at all identical with the temper of the majority, although it is no doubt influenced by it. We are able today in Europe to observe the release, with the breakdown of authority, of the true nationalism so long held down under this system or that. The English, for instance, are, I believe, appearing in their true colors, relieved of the overlordship of their French or Celtic masters. Just for a moment, in such times as these, before a new harness is assumed, we catch a glimpse of the true animal, so difficult to destroy, underneath. I once heard of a mad doctor in Hereford who had a pony which he used to paint different colors, except on rainy days. He was able in this way to defeat nature's pigmentary provisions according to his fancy. That is what happens to the subject bulk of a population. Certainly every settled population as every place has a genius of its own. And certainly it will affect whoever rules it, as well as be affected itself in return. But the genius can look after itself. It is a vast vegetative thing of a certain color and shape. It is perhaps a pity that the lily must be painted. Rousseau is best known for his advocacy of its being left alone, with its natural colors. But that side of Rousseau's teaching is universally admitted to be utopian and quite impossible. If today you must be a socialist of some sort, what order of socialist are you going to be? For, evidently, you will say, socialist means very different and indeed opposite things. I have already said that in the abstract I believe the Soviet system to be the best. It has spectacularly broken with all the past of Europe, It looks to the East, which is spiritually so much greater and intellectually so much finer than Europe, for inspiration. It springs ostensibly from a desire to alleviate the lot of the poor and outcast, and not merely to set up a cast-iron, militarist-looking state. And yet for Anglo-Saxon countries as they are constituted today, some modified form of fascism would probably be best. The United States is, of course, in a unique position, and for the moment it is the only country in the world of which you can say it would not benefit by a revolution. And eventually, with its great potentialities, it may be able to evolve some novel form of government of its own. The only socialism that differs very much in principle from Fascismo is reformist socialism, or the early 19th century utopias, or, to a somewhat less extent, Proudhon. All Marxian doctrine, all etatism or collectivism, conforms very nearly in practice to the fascist ideal. Fascismo is merely a spectacular Marinettian flourish put onto the tail, or, if you like, the head, of Marxism, that is, of course, fascism as interpreted by its founder, Mussolini. And that is the sort of socialism that this essay would indicate as the most suitable for Anglo-Saxon countries or colonies, with as much of Sovietic proletarian sentiment as could be got into it without impairing its discipline, and as little coercion as is compatible with good sense. In short, to get some sort of peace to enable us to work, we should naturally seek the most powerful and stable authority that can be devised. Mussolini is considered by many people as an unfortunately theatrical, grimacing personage, and is perhaps a little prejudicial to the regime of which he is the official figurehead. The power that he represents has, in its choice of a figurehead, showed, perhaps, bad taste. But in everything except taste it cannot be denied that it has chosen well. What has been effected through him is, in any case, in another category altogether from taste. His government is doing for Italy, starting ostensibly from the other end what the Soviet has done for Russia. The more militant liberalist elements are being heavily discouraged in a very systematic way. They are not being physically wiped out, as happened in Russia, but they are being eliminated quite satisfactorily without recourse to murder on a large scale. What will shortly be reached will be a great socialist state such as Marx intended, rigidly centralized, working from top to bottom with the regularity and smoothness of a machine. The Caisse di Lavoro are occupied by the governmental labor organizations, podestas are appointed to every township and commune, everything is centralized to the smallest detail. Complete political standardization, with the suppression of the last vestiges of the party system, will rescue masses of energy otherwise wasted in politics for more productive ends. All the humbug of a democratic suffrage, all the imbecility that is so wastefully manufactured, will henceforth be spared this happy people. There will not be an extremely efficient ruling caste, pretending to possess a liberal section, or soft place in its heart for the struggling people, on the traditional English model, but the opposite to that. There will be instead an organization that proclaims its intention to rule without interminable palaver, without a talking house to humbug its servants in, sweating them but enabling them to call themselves free. In short, all the clumsy and gigantic characteristic shams of Anglo-Saxon life will have no parallel in such a regime. Such humbug as still remains will no doubt slowly vanish. In 10 years a state will have been built in which at last no trace of European liberalism or its accompanying democratic liberty exists. This will have been the creation of a tyrant or dictator, with virtual powers of life and death, for with his highly disciplined, implicitly obedient, fascist bands, no person anywhere will be able to escape assassination if he causes trouble to the central government, or holds, too loudly, opinions that displease it. As the press will be, is already, under the direct control of the central government, and its editors and responsible staffs appointed by it, death, imprisonment, or banishment can be inflicted on anybody, anywhere, without ruffling the surface of opinion indeed, can occur, if required, without its being reported. In such a state it is difficult to see how politics could exist. Economics will similarly disappear. All the boring and wasteful sham sciences that have sprung up in support of the great pretenses of democracy, and in deference to notions of democratic freedom, will die from one day to the next, for they are the most barren of luxuries, and no one would be interested to keep them alive for their own sakes, in the way that arts are sometimes kept alive, for an hour. That the greater number of socialists, especially of the reformist type, still live in a quite unreal world of liberal idealism is an absurdity that cannot be imputed to any neglect on the part of fate in supplying them with portents. Darker portents, from their point of view, could hardly have been devised for them. Nor can leaders of revolutionary opinion, like Sorel, be accused of leaving them unenlightened as to what a dark and desperate world they have chosen to dream their dreams in. But if they were all awaiting execution the next morning, on the capital offense of stupidity, for instance, they would still believe that it was some kindly if tactless joke, between friends, on the part of those terrible fellows their brother socialists of a somewhat more realistic temper. The intelligence of the white races has been softened by success, they have been used for so long to easy and unchallenged power where other races were concerned, they succumb at once to a little intelligence. That is the weapon they have scorned and neglected, alas for them, and a litany of such scorn they are being today carefully taught, to the tune of you may have those highbrow airs.